Paper Mill Playhouse acknowledges that our theater stands on the traditional land of the Lenni Lenape. We honor the land and the indigenous people who inhabited it for thousands of years before European settlers arrived.
Welcome to Paper Mill Prologues. All of us here at the theater are thrilled to be ushering in our 85th season with a world premiere musical production of F. Scott Fitzgerald's literary masterpiece, The Great Gatsby. The goal of Prologues is to give our audience an extra layer of insight and context for our productions by exploring some of the themes, histories, and cultural relevance behind each show. The Great Gatsby holds a persuasive place in the zeitgeist of the 1920s, making Fitzgerald instrumental in shaping our perception of the decade. When we think of the Roaring Twenties, the images that arise seem to be pulled right from the pages of his American classic. The flappers, jazz bands, glasses of champagne, lavish parties, and speakeasies. But, as with the novel's narrator, Nick Carraway, Fitzgerald provides a single, specific point of view with brief glimpses of the lives and cultures beyond his own. But what was really happening alongside this fictional, affluent Long Island town of West Egg? These other worlds and cultures were integral to shaping what Fitzgerald himself coined as the Jazz Age. So let's take a deeper look at those aspects of the 20s that live in the shadow of Gatsby, and why the extravagant yet dangerous parties provided the perfect backdrop for Fitzgerald's vivid, beautiful, and ultimately tragic tale of what it means to pursue the American dream.
Major changes to American culture were underway as World War I came to a close and the 20s arrived on the scene. The decade was one of major social, political, and economic shifts. With the rise of the automotive industry and mass production, America was turning toward a consumer culture, and the economy grew exponentially. A rise in personal credit allowed for more Americans to afford a car. Travel became more accessible. Service stations and motels sprang up to meet travel needs. Hollywood movies provided both entertainment and widespread influence. The first radio station opened in 1920, and by the end of the decade, radios were in 12 million American homes, making information and music widely accessible for the first time. Young people were able to explore neighborhoods and social gatherings outside of their own. And because of Prohibition, they were seeking entertainment in unconventional spaces. Prohibition played a major role in the mythology of the Roaring Twenties and framed drinking as a glamorous indiscretion. For years, organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union had been working to ban alcohol, hoping that it would aid with issues such as domestic violence. But Prohibition was also a result of American xenophobia, targeting establishments that were political hubs for working-class people and immigrants. In 1920, the Volstead Act closed every bar in America. But rather than eliminating America's relationship with alcohol, it electrified it with the temptation of danger. It sent the distribution of alcohol underground, contributing to the establishment of organized crime, and transformed drinking into a social activity in homes and speakeasies for both men and women. Among these speakeasies were illegal jazz clubs, resulting in an increase in social mingling cross-culturally. Jazz had become the music of the young generation, who felt its infectious, syncopated rhythm was in defiance of the conservative, traditional music and customs their elders deemed respectable. White audiences would venture to black neighborhoods, such as Harlem, to drink, dance, and listen to this brand new music. Through Nick's narration, we too see the music and dance as exciting and seductive, but beyond that, this access to new music was also creating more visibility and mainstream interest in black culture. Starting out as a popular musical form in African American communities of New Orleans and the southern United States, the evolution of jazz music would coincide with the Great Migration starting in the 1910s. With millions of black people migrating from the Jim Crow South in search of better opportunities, families would settle in the urban areas of the North and Midwest, such as New York City, Chicago, and Baltimore, among others. Jazz musicians and their sound would follow this migration and continue their development of this new genre of music. At the same time, black social dances were also gaining popularity in the mainstream. Broadway was a beacon of showcasing the latest cultural crazes. Shuffle Along in 1921 played a key role in launching the Harlem Renaissance and introducing jazz music to Broadway audiences. In 1923, the musical Runnin' Wild introduced the Charleston, which would ignite a national dance craze that would become synonymous with the decade. Despite its fast-growing love amongst the masses, jazz music was also seen as primitive and exoticized as jungle music that was both foreign and thrilling to white audiences. Protests arose from various groups, including but not limited to politicians, social reform groups, and churches. Conservative news publications popularized the disparaging view that if one indulged in jazz music, they would lose their ability to control themselves and be civilized, and, in turn, be more susceptible to drinking and engaging in promiscuous behavior. These publications featured racist and anti-Semitic articles aimed at black musicians and Jewish music promoters. In the 1920s, over 60 communities across the United States prohibited jazz from being played in local dance halls. This did not help black artists gain legitimacy within the music world, and this social attitude prolonged jazz from being taken seriously as a respectable and complex art form. Simultaneously, due to the cross-cultural interest in jazz, white artists managed to appropriate the art form, taking credit for its success, lending it some legitimacy in the eyes of biased listeners. White musicians copying and taking advantage of the music originated and produced by artists of color has been a lasting trend in music and other art forms for decades, and the 1920s was no exception. Despite the challenges black jazz artists faced, they continued to persevere, and musicians such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Mary Lou Williams would establish themselves as pioneers of jazz. The trend of new music creating a cultural phenomenon and controversy has appeared throughout history and spans generations. The emergence of jazz music can be paralleled with the likes of both rock and roll music in the 50s and 60s and the rise of hip-hop music in the 80s, 90s, and more recent decades.
In approaching this adaptation, composer and lyricist team Jason Howland and Nathan Tysen didn't want to just spin 1920s hits of the day, fearing that the piece would feel dusty or old-fashioned, when in fact, the vibe of the 20s should be just the opposite, fresh, new, and groundbreaking.
The Gatsby score is a nod to the 1920s, honoring the early jazz influence, but with the energy of the party music of the 2020s. Choreographer Dominique Kelly also looked to the influences of those 1920s social dances and how they are still influencing movement today. Kelly blends historical dance with the energy of modern music videos to both connect with the audience and transport us to, as Tysen put it, a party we want to go to. But what about when the party is over? What remains? As with the fear that accompanied the emergence and acceptance of jazz, there was a fear amongst privileged classes of a loss of traditional values and a shift in the balance of power within society. As we see in The Great Gatsby, where differing views of old and new money are characterized in East and West Egg, many people with generational wealth were skeptical of new money for a variety of social and political reasons. With the end of World War I and the influenza epidemic, the economy was booming. Inspired by American tycoons and the possibility of a meteoric rise to wealth and status, many were eager to get in on the action. While some people certainly found financial success, get-rich-quick schemes, also known as Ponzi schemes, took advantage of many people's lack of financial literacy and promised huge rewards that would never pay out. From these get-rich-quick schemes to class and racial divides and the desire by those at the top to remain there, distrust of new money bloomed. This led to real tension and terror. In 1921, a white mob destroyed what was known as Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This became known as the Tulsa Massacre. It destroyed the socioeconomic progress of the community, as well as hundreds of homes and lives. And, to this day, there has been no financial compensation for survivors.
A lot of these riots are really fueled by anxieties about Black advancement and Black success. And we're not only talking about cities like Chicago or DC or New York. We're talking about cities like Tulsa.
In 1921, those same tensions in the United States were present in Tulsa. And it did revolve around jealousy and resentment. It threatened the system of white supremacy.
Certainly in Tulsa, which was an incredible concentration of black wealth, you can look at Tulsa as a tinderbox. Like, what is the spark that's going to ignite it?
The event encapsulates the reality that, in some minds, the American dream is not meant for all Americans. Among the many changes facing society was the emergence of the so-called New Woman. With the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920, women were afforded the right to vote, though it would be decades before that right could be fully exercised by all women, regardless of race. The role of women had already begun to shift during World War I. On the home front, women had taken on new positions in the workplace during the war effort, whether volunteering aid to wounded soldiers or manufacturing war materials.
After World War I, there was a great change in the country. The young men had been overseas, they had associated with other countries, and they met other people. There was a song, How You Gonna Keep Them Down on the Farm After They've Seen Paris? And the young women had been given more responsibility. They had to do more things for themselves than they'd ever done before. They never went back to being completely dependent on men as they had been.
Gender roles were beginning to reshape as the number of women entering the workforce increased. Their presence grew in areas such as meatpacking plants, ammunition factories, nursing, and the Navy, becoming formal members of the armed services for the first time. Women used their clerical skills as stenographers and telephone operators to serve essential roles during wartime. The high visibility of their presence and contribution earned society's respect as they were essential workers, though these roles were reserved mainly for white, affluent women who were able to be supported by their families. As women put on uniforms, identifying them in positions of authority and leadership, the previous expectations of a woman's role solely as a wife and mother began to change. Subsequently, women could start to view their futures with greater possibility.
Well, that was the last thing in my mind, getting married. I guess, and my mother said to me one time, Marie, when are you going to get married? I said, I don't know. I'm in no hurry. And I wasn't. I loved my freedom.
Fitzgerald's female characters were inspired by his own romantic pursuits, particularly his wife Zelda. In fact, he pulled dialogue directly from her quotes in order to establish a female voice in his own writing. However, again, we only receive the narrator Nick's perspective, a male perspective, through which to understand the female characters in Gatsby. So, they appear rather opaque and reflect the social stereotypes of women in the 1920s as defined by men. Daisy, Jordan, and Myrtle, a wife, an athlete, and a mistress, are archetypal characters who seem to represent male fears of the new woman and how her agency and liberation would challenge the patriarchy. Gatsby's pursuit of success includes acquiring Daisy as a trophy wife whose old-world money status would elevate him to the desired, privileged class. Given the opportunity to have these female characters fully embodied on stage in our production, book writer Kait Kerrigan chose to see past Nick's point of view to allow for the female characters to exist beyond the male gaze. The Roaring Twenties itself was a moment for women to loosen society's grip and, like the iconic flapper, step outside of the dictated norms and reimagine what the American dream could mean for the modern woman.
Defiant and daring, the flapper delighted in shocking her elders. Gone was the good girl who preserved propriety. The flapper was one of the boys. And the flapper was bad, boldly, bravely bad.
Fun and laughter, this aggravates you. Some reformers says a warmer climate awaits you. If it's naughty, rouge your lips, shake your shoulders and twist your hips. Let a lady confess, I wanna be fed. If it's naughty to vamp the men, sleep each morning till be fair.
With all the change and increased access for some, but not all, it's hard to pin down what the American dream would truly look like for the characters in Gatsby. And perhaps that makes sense, as they seem to strive for those things that will never lead to fulfillment. Like Gatsby, Fitzgerald pursued a prominent socialite who, only after Fitzgerald secured his first publishing contract, accepted his proposal. And though the couple came to be known as the life of the party, and while there was evident mutual care in their relationship, there was also infidelity, alcohol abuse, severe mental illness, and financial woes. No doubt, the 1920s were an explosive time. Progress, access, connection, and information would only grow as electricity, travel, film, and radio waves spread across a changing nation, and with that came instability. The fabric of society was being rewoven, and not always by those in power, sowing discord. New money was blurring the class lines. Black artists and culture were increasingly visible and influential. Immigrants continued to arrive and change the face of America. But despite these changes, Americans could share that one glimmering hope, the American dream. Though clearly, it meant something different for each.
Almost a century later, our raging 20s knocked us off our feet as they came barreling in, filled yet again with social unrest, sickness, and mistrust. And though we continue to move forward, we face the same struggles of the past, continuously learning and forgetting. And we too are exposed to an unprecedented era of connection, and both the liberation and fear that access to information and technology can provide. Living in times of social upheaval can be burdensome, and so may lead us to seek out beauty and frivolity, even if it is only skin deep and for a passing moment. Book writer Kerrigan compares the story to a fable, which is perhaps what makes it so adaptable to our own experiences now. These are quintessential characters that are, despite what it might cost them, striving and clinging to dreams that are unreachable. So perhaps the plights of Fitzgerald's characters remain iconic because they transcend their era. They are human plights and universal. Striving for an unattainable dream, we too may settle for an illusion. Fitzgerald himself said, "That is part of the beauty of all literature. You discover that your longings are universal longings, that you're not lonely and isolated from anyone. You belong." So we hope you will grab a glass and raise it up to the Gatsby we offer you now, one that is a marriage of influences of the past and reflections of today, and one that mirrors our ever-changing, evolving, and receding tide of society. Enjoy the show.